I'm here with Grant today, which was one of the people that organised the Splash One happening, which was an event that was running in Glasgow between 1985 and 1986. The club brought a lot of bands that we all like, and the design look of the posters became iconic. I'm a designer myself. So I'm very honored to have this conversation with Grant today. Thank you for being here. Just to remind everyone, here on Pop Mutation, all the donations will be split between the artists and the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, which is based in Glasgow. So you guys were being a collective of people that were putting together the club. How did you get together? And how did you start the club?
It was kind of, I suppose we all got to know each other through going to gigs in primarily the early 80s, in the sort of post-punk era. We'd meet each other at gigs. And some people I knew a bit earlier than that were involved in it as well. But most of that was, the meeting sort of, or the getting together was in the early 80s. And then there was a sort of hiatus in the music scene generally, we felt, at that time in the mid-80s. Although there were still some great bands about the place, a lot of them had become, bigger than, a club-sized venue, and there was no place really doing what ultimately we wanted to do. So we kind of came up with this idea. It was mainly instigated by Bobby at the time, because he had the connections with Alan McGee at Creation Records.
Yeah.
And we knew we could get, some bands from that label. So that's how we got together that way. With just a sort of idea of, putting on some bands that we thought were, newer bands, but interesting bands. Some of them Scottish based, a lot of them, and most of them UK wide.
So was it something similar in Glasgow then, or did you come together because, there was a space to fill for those bands that you want to bring?
I think, what happened was, from my memory, is that, we had this period in Glasgow. We had some fantastic clubs like Night Moves that morphed into Rooftops. You had the Bungalow Barn Paisley, you had the School of Art where gigs were getting put on. So these were all great venues, excuse me. And then it really sort of started to dissipate round about the sort of early 1980s. And that sort of really was the sort of catalyst in us sort of deciding to do something like this. So it was kind of like, just because there was nothing much else going about at that time. As I said already, there were still some great bands that we all loved, that were still going about, but they were just too big to put on at a smaller club. So that was the reason why we sort of pulled it together and put on these bands.
Great. I mean, it feels that that is a communal want and wish from a lot of promoters when they start doing their own thing. So it feels that it's a similar story to other promoters that then started something great like your club. So how much did the music community of Glasgow and Scotland influence the actual club, and your experience in general, as well as attending gigs and all?
Well, it's a funny thing. I mean, obviously bands like the Pastels were already going about at that point. They were not a new band, but there was new bands around at that point in Scotland, like the Shop Assistants and such like. And, and Primal Scream had started in 81, I think it was, something like that, 81, 82, with just Big Jim Beattie initially, and then Bobby obviously thereafter. So there was a sort of scene as such, but I suppose we were more into the postcard, and in actual fact I personally was more into the Edinburgh scene, the sort of Fire Engines and Joseph Kay and such like, than sort of the Orange Juice of this world. But other people that were involved in Splash One were into the postcard side of things as well, but all that had sort of ran its course. So this was a kind of just perfect time for this club to start.
Yeah.
And I think Bobby had put on Primal Scream at Lucifer's in Glasgow just earlier this 85, and I actually found this morning one of the posters for that, which was predates the Splash One stuff, but that was, you know, the first sort of start of these sort of get-togethers. We really thought the key to, you know, doing this was making some sort of statement as far as the artwork goes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel when you say like product from Edinburgh and all of that, I feel that again, that we're a collective of people that started something together. And so I wanted to ask you if being a collective was actually a formula that other clubs and other places kind of adopted as well as you. So a bunch of people and friends that just start something together.
Well, do you know, I mean, to be honest, I couldn't answer that with enough conviction, because I felt that because we worked as this collective, you know, initially Bobby with his connection with Creation Records, and there's quite a lot of Creation Records bands that we put on. And then, you know, other members really sort of starting to influence the gigs that were put on thereafter. Like, I mean, Derek Loudon was, you know, a big factor in the club pushing forward to a degree. I was, and you know, we sort of took over the latter stages of the club, certainly late 1985 into the first half of, or the first quarter of 1986. Me and Derek sort of pushed things forward a bit, but so the collective aspect of it was really important. But I'm not really aware of any other clubs, certainly in Scotland, that were doing a collective type format at that time.
Yeah.
There were still clubs going that, you know, we saw bands that we didn't put on ourselves, or other bands that were, you know, we really liked. Yeah. We weren't the only venue that was, or only club that was putting on bands by any shape of the imagination.
So who was it? You? So at the very start, was it you, Bobby, and who else was there? Just so.
It was actually 8 of us that pushed us forward, and those people were me, Derek Loudon, Louise Wright, Paul Hart, Paul McNeil, Bobby, Karen Parker, and Dave Allen. And Dave Allen, I think from memory, he dropped out after a few gigs, and it ended up just the sort of 7 of us doing that. And what we did was we were the ones that fly posted around the city centre. We were the ones that went round the bars in Glasgow and handed out leaflets, or flyers, I should say. We were the ones that took turns at the door each night, you know. So, you know, I would be on from, say, you know, 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, and then somebody else would take over. There was usually 2 of us in the door, because it was a cash-only entrance. So, yeah, I mean, the collective side of things was fantastic. I mean, everybody really pitched in.
Yeah. But you said that even the printer himself, the person that was actually dealing with the colors on the poster, was also another friend that you met through the flyer that you just show from the.
Yeah, that I think again from memory. I mean, it's a long time ago, but I think it was a guy Bobby knew called Moxie that lived in the south side of Glasgow, and he either worked for a printer or ran his own print firm. I can't remember what it was. And I think it was he worked for a firm of printers, and Bobby got him to do those Primal Scream ones I just showed you for that Lucifer's gig. And I think it was all relatively cheap. And he was a brilliant guy. He was a real sort of unsung hero of the whole thing. I mean, I only met him a couple of times because he lived in the south side. I didn't drive. There was only one of us that drove, and that was Derek Loudon. And Derek would go over with the artwork or the mock-ups to meet Moxie, or Bobby would meet him and say, we want this poster done, and in this case a 2-tone one, you know, black and red. And you know, he would go away, and we never got trials back or proofs back. We just got a bag of, you know, a carrier bag full of 200 posters, you know, a few days later. And it was like, you know, I don't think we were ever disappointed in anything he did. He always did what we asked him to do. And if there was any muck-ups, it would have been in our behalf.
So basically you were giving him a layout, a collage of things, of a design that you've been doing, black and white.
Yeah. I mean, I've got one here which, you know, may or may not come up on the screen. This is one for one of the primal screen ones. So you'll see that, I mean, it's kind of just pretty simplistic cut and paste. You know, you've got little bits of, you know, stuck onto a background, using maybe an old poster, a previous one, you know, cut it out. And so you would just hand that to him on card and say, can you do 200 of these in purple or whatever it might be? And, you know, away we'd go. And, you know, I mean, it was dead cheap. And, you know, I've got the accounts book here for some of the gigs, you know, so, you know, I've got this, you know, for the first one with the Malcolm McDowell poster, I mean, it was 15 quid was the cost of the 200 posters.
All right.
And then, you know, it went up to the princely sum of 25 quid thereafter. So, and these were all, you know, they're all screen printed, you know, they're all, you know, done properly. There was no, it wasn't, you know, no coloured photocopier.
So you mentioned that you were trying to find a couple of spots in Glasgow and then put a few of the posters all together, almost having like a wall of posters, right?
Yeah, I mean, the problem was, or one of the things that, I mean, for whatever reason, we went for roughly A4 size posters. There was variations in that, and I think from memory, again, it was whatever paper was lying about that Moxie could either nick from the company he was working for, or they were just, you know, end of line stuff. So some of it's on textured paper, some of it's on glossy paper, some of it's in matte, some of them are matte paper. They're all slight variations in the A4 size, but we knew they were always going to be small format. So rather than just go around and stick, you know, one poster up, you know, that was only going to be that size, it wouldn't have any impact. We would do groups of maybe 9 or 12 of them together. And it meant that obviously then we didn't have to go around too many locations as well, because there was usually 3 or 4 of us doing it at any one time. So there'd be one of us with a, you know, a thick carrier bag full of wallpaper paste already made up and a brush. One of us with a pile of the posters, and then 2 people either end of the street watching out for the cops to see if they were coming around. And then we, you know, in places like Girl Street was there was loads of shop windows that were empty, so we would just, you know, fly post there. And in prominent places, Union Street was another place where there was record shops in Glasgow at the time, so we would put them in key places, and it was quite easy to get rid of, you know, I don't know, 100 posters in 20 minutes, and then you would look at other pockets where you would fill them in, and you go around like the Rock Garden and hand them in one, and they would stick one in the wall. So there were a lot of, you know, places that were very helpful.
I was actually curious to understand how important was to get the right design on the street. How important was that?
I mean, I suppose we went for the sort of iconic images of the time that we were into. So you were, you know, Malcolm McDowell from A Clockwork Orange, you know, the scene from If, where they're shooting the schoolmasters at the end of the film. You know, Natasha Kinski, the one you just showed there, Richard Hell, you know, all these, or Edie Sedgwick doing Warhol's screenshots. You know, these were all iconic images to us. They fitted into the bands that we were putting on, the music we played, the general attitude that we wanted to get across with the club itself. So, and, you know, obviously that appealed to, you know, people around who saw these images. And I think, you know, you've mentioned it already, but the fact that these were really brightly coloured posters, and, you know, in what was, you know, a pretty drab landscape at the time, you know, it wasn't the, you know, the most attractive, you know, scene walking up and down, you know, our Girl Street. It still isn't that, to be perfectly frank, but, you know, even then it was worse. So when you got a group of, like, you know, 12 or 15 brightly coloured posters, you were attracted towards it.
By being a collective of people, also the artists and the band were ever involved in making the poster or making the artworks for the night.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I mean, that one and the other pastel, we put in the pastels twice. Both the pastels posters were designed by Stephen and Aggie, I think, at the time. And, you know, we were totally happy with that because, you know, they wanted to, you know, have an image that represented
themselves.
them.
Yeah.
And they maybe didn't want us to, you know, come up with something that didn't represent them. So we were totally comfortable with that. You know, you showed that the big flame one earlier on. Well, from memory, I think that was Ian Beveridge, who was a non-member of Splash One, but he was part of the Mackenzie's support band, and Dave Allen, and they were, like we all were, into Kerouac and the Beat Generation and all that sort of stuff. So they did that one. You know, Derek did some of them, Karen and Louise did some, Bobby did some, I did some. So we really sort of, you know, split it up between us all, as well as including the bands.
Any collaboration that came from designing posters and artwork for bands? In like, is there any example of bands that maybe wanted to use one of the artwork, or just was interested to have a collaboration together?
I remember reading somewhere that David Keegan of the shop assistants, you know, mentioned that, you know, he was delighted that we chose, there you go, that Edie Sedgwick on the poster for when we put them on. And I think, you know, that was purely by accident, I assume. I don't think that was influenced by, but they loved that. And that actual typography down the right-hand side there, the shop assistants, that ended up being used by them on their album cover. And that was just, you know, I mean, you're going to laugh at this now, you know, being a graphic artist, but that's Letraset, and that's why there's a, you know, cracking in it, there's bits missing. Maybe that's the charm of it in a way, but there was nothing else available to us then. You know, and we weren't graphic artists, we weren't Peter Saville or anything like that. You know, we didn't have a background where, you know, somebody had access to some sort of I suppose, you know, there must have been computer graphics about back then in some shape or form, but certainly none of us had access to that. So, you know, that's probably the only instance that I can think of where the typography, the lettering of the shop assistants was used by them on their album sleeve, which is quite nice.
Might be someone that is watching that's got some of this poster at home, maybe.
Right. Yes. The funny thing is, I look at these and I think they're pretty. I mean, I think they do look good, and it's partly down to the colours as much as anything else. But you know, these things were knocked together pretty rapidly. You know, there was nothing that. I mean, I think from memory, I mean, Karen was probably one of the ones who took a lot of time over things. She did the prime screen one with the scene from F on it, which you'll probably bring back up at some other point. And that was really quite clever because, you know, both she and I were into photography, and both had 35mm SLRs. She had, they did that one, but it's the one with the scene from F on it. But we started mucking about with our cameras, and this is in the days of VHS videos, okay? So you'd have a video of the film If, for example, and then what you would do, or what she did, which is brilliant, is that she froze it. So it's the colour version of that one I'm talking about. She paused the videotape, so you've got a grainy image because you paused the videotape, and took a photograph of it with a 35mm SLR. I may or may not have printed it for her, I can't remember, because I was only one with a darkroom. And then the little strip down the side is just, you know, this one down here is just sort of further images like from the contact sheets. So she was one of the ones that really took a lot of time and put a lot of time and effort into the design, probably more so than, say, I would do. That image you've got there, I think, was one that Bobby did, and perhaps Karen, and that's the one that you've alluded to in the past. You know, it was relatively controversial, or thought to be at the time. You know, and because it's a Hitler Youth boy there, and you know there was a swastika. Prominent at that point.
So what we got next?
And the Skidoo one was something I did. You know, I was into bands like the Pop Group and A Certain Ratio, and 23 Skidoo were part of that sort of oeuvre. And so I took the 23 Skidoo strap line from the top. That's off the Cool 12-inch then, these images are images from a mixture of the poster that came with the pop group's first album, Y.
Okay.
Some of the little Hitler Youth Boy in the middle, that's from a book that I had called The Illustrated History of the Third Reich. Then you've got the helmet from the front of Dispatches by Michael Herr, so that's alluding to the Vietnam War. Nixon, obviously, again with that as well. So, that was sort of, and done in a khaki green. Again, that's very much the sort of Skidoo type thing, so, and then, so that worked perfectly from that point of view. But these are just photocopies of images and then torn up, laid in a bit of paper with a bit of Letraset here or there, and then handed over to Moxie, and he came up with that. And you would just say, I want this in a khaki green, please, or as near as you can do a khaki green.
Yeah, because I've noticed that there are very controversial images sometimes, and they totally help the message to be delivered as strong as you want, and within the colors, they just really do the job. A lot of new artists are actually using this approach to make posters, mostly music. And I think that in the 80s, it feels that, your club, even musically, was trying to give a platform of different type of music. It could have been, you said to me before that even the mix that you were doing as a DJ were a mix of music from the 60s, from the 70s, and so for the first time, like, I think that this DIY imagery comes out as well, like this mix of everything, like collage and typography really started to kick off and become a
I know what you mean, but of course that happened in punk. If you look at bands, let's say the Desperate Bicycles and the TV Personalities, or the post-punk, but they were doing all that DIY stuff back then as well. And this was just a small version of that. We didn't produce any records or anything like that. We just produced these posters. But funnily enough, Raissa, I found, I was looking through all this, my box of rubbish today, and I'll read this out to you. It's hilarious. It's a newspaper article by David Belcher of the Herald in 1985, and it was an interview with Derek at the time. And it's kind of like, I suppose in a way, it kind of sort of says everything that we were doing back then. I'm going to sort of, not talk about too specific, but there's one of the paragraphs that sticks out says, I'll just take my specs off actually. According to the event's detractors, you'll also be exposed to near fatal doses of obscurism and self-indulgence. The Gang of Eight counter by saying, if you don't like ours, do one yourself. And then it goes on to say, why are the bands on stage, but briefly, blah, blah, blah. And how did it begin? It began out of boredom. We play the music we like, but can't hear anywhere else. We put on bands we want to see. To date, the bands have included such as the Pastels and Soup Dragons, June Brides, Primal Scream and Big Flame. Felt are expected next month. Husker Du are a remote possibility. Amazing. It will last until we run out of bands we want to see, or until we lose interest. Bands are on for a short time because people soon get bored with them. So, kind of like these little snapshots goes on. There's a bit more stuff there, but that's kind of like, an encapsulation of what it was. It's kind of like a bit, stuck up your arse in some respects, but that's the way we felt then.
Yeah, because the club basically ran for a year, right? And was it once a month?
Yeah, it was just almost exactly a year, split over 6 months of 85 and 86.
Yeah. So what kind of bands did you have? We saw, like, now I just put the Sonic Youth, and then obviously the Pastel.
I think that it's quite interesting. There was a hiatus after Wire, which was December 85, just before Christmas. There was a hiatus of about 3 months. I think even maybe 4 months. It wasn't until April when we put Skidoo on again. Mm-hmm. And what happened again? This is from memory, is that we sort of had this run of quite a few events up till the end of that year, end of 85. And I think from memory, Bobby was touring with the Jesus and Mary Chain at that point. and mixing that with running his own band, or his band with Jim Beattie, Primal Scream. And, you know, something had to give, and he was away on tour a lot at that point. So the connection with Creation Records bands was getting, you know, a bit more difficult. I'd been to see Wire that year in the Oxford Museum of Modern Art. And I approached them afterwards, in the pub afterwards, and sort of said, you know, are you guys doing any more gigs? They hadn't thought about it. They then, one of the bass player, Graham Lewis, put me in contact with a representative of theirs, and we agreed to put them on. But, you know, this was a real big event, this one, because this was the first time we put on a band that wanted a contract. They wanted a rider. And we'd never seen a contract before. You know, we were paying bands, you know, 50 quid, 100 quid. You know, and so I got a contract through it, and, you know, this was a high risk thing, because Echo and the Bunnymen were playing in Glasgow that night as well.
All right.
And there was no pre-sale tickets, so it was kind of like just turn up in the night. And you know, I convinced everybody else that this was worthy of doing. But that's the reason that went from, you know, usually £2 up to £4, because I was running at factoring in, well, if we only get, you know, 200 or 300 people, we might not lose that much out of it, or just break even.
Yeah. As
it was, it ended up, you know, selling out, and the management kind of let in another 30 people above the sort of fire regs amount. So I think it was about 430 or 450 or something like that. And it was a resounding success. But, you know, we didn't know that in advance. There was no pre-sale tickets. It was all cash on the night. And that was probably the only event that we ever actually made decent money out of it. Most of the gigs, if we made anything out of it, was like 50 quid, and 50 quid, you know, divided by 7 or 8 people is not that much back then. But we all walked away that night with, well, I did. I walked away with the bag with all the money. But after we divvied it up, we made 100 quid each out of that one that night. So
that's great. Feeling very rich.
and that's the only poster that we ever did that didn't have any imagery on it. And in fact, I found a mock-up of what we were going to do originally for that one, which is that, which is the girl who was death from The Prisoner. And I decided at the last minute, well, listen, the word Wire says it all. You know, if you know who Wire are, then that says it all. So I took that, the actual name there as it's done, the typography from the first album cover, the pink flag one. So it was tiny on the album cover, and just in my work, you know, and I know with a you know, quite a good top of the range Xerox machine back then, blew it up. And then at the end of it, what I found was that the E in the end, I just couldn't quite get it to fit in. So I had to trim it.
You got it.
Well, I trimmed it, and it's, you know, it bugs me. Nobody else spots this, but that actual E is a wee bit shorter than it should be. But I couldn't get the photocopier to do anything else. And then we thought, you've got to do it in pink, haven't you? You know, just to sort of, you know.
Maybe we can just finish and say a couple of things about, like, how did the club came to an end, and what kind of impact Splash had to you?
So there were other clubs going at the time as well. You know, Derek Lead a club in Cumbernauld. There was the Club de France in Coatbridge. There was, you know, and then obviously clubs like Subterraneans and Greenock came on 86, 87. The Kes Club with Tam Coyle. You know, Tam Coyle, big, you know, a really important figure. You know, he put on the Wake and Primal Scream in 81 or 82, whenever it was, the Henry Wood Hall. He did the Kes Club, you know, was the first booker with, I think, King Tut. So he was a big figure. He sort of took the mantle up after we ditched it. There was the Sunday night club at Daddy Warbucks after that. Then there was numerous other little clubs upstairs in Daddy Warbucks after that, which was where Splash One took place. So yeah, it spawned a few other things as well out of it. And in actual fact, there's a guy I know called, a friend of mine called Chris Brickley, is doing this book called 16 Years at the moment, which is just about to go to the publishers. And it's the Scottish club scene from 76 to 1990. And he's gone through all the venues throughout Scotland, from the most obscure little venue in Forfar or wherever it might be, to the venues like Splash One in Glasgow, and that book will be something I've seen some of the images in it, and it's memorabilia, whether it's posters or tickets or
Wow.
photographs taken by the audience. So it's it looks as though it'll be fantastic. So that's something that will fill in a lot of the gaps of that sort of era that it will
Keep my eyes peeled for that book then. I think that all of these clubs, small or big, are all seminal to make to create the experience. Like Glasgow has had a lot of these different clubs, and I think they are all as important as the bigger one, because it's where all the action and smaller bands start playing it, and then they can have a stage and finally show their music.
I mean, from our perspective in the sort of post-punk era in particular, the night moves and rooftops in Sucky Street were a really big important venue for us. That's where we saw the birthday party with 20 or 30 other people. We started off with the Cocteau Twins, all these sort of bands in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. And maybe Splash One was the same for people that were 4 or 5 years younger than us.
Yeah, exactly. Like everybody's kind of influencing each other in many ways. So but I think we need to cut it here because we might not have any more time. But I don't know if there's anything online that if anyone is interested, they can try to search for, or if anyone's interested on this design.
I think there are bits that people have, blogs that people have done. I mean, there's odd things that I've contributed towards in the past. I mean, there's not a huge amount online, but there's enough to I think the people that are interested in in Splash One know enough about it, to be honest. I don't think there's a huge book there to write about it, that's for sure.
Oh well, everyone's contributing to the scene, but
maybe a pamphlet.
Look out for that book, maybe.
16 years by Chris Brickley. Should be really good.
Perfect. Okay, Grant, thank you so much for this chat. It was great, and I will definitely get inspired by the design that you sent me, because they're amazing. So I'm feeling very honored to be having a chat with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good to see you. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.